Come back to order. Senator Ulibarri.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, colleagues, for this debate on House Bill 1164. I've retained my time to focus on the merits of this bill and answer some of the concerns that have been raised over the course of 2 days of vigorous debate. So thank you to my colleagues for this process, and hopefully folks recognize that I sat up here for every single amendment, both in second reading and here on third reading, and also in committee, to engage on a broader conversation about our fundamental right to vote. This bill was drafted, as I said, in close consultation with the special districts, the folks who provide our services at the most local level, our fire districts, our school boards, and our municipalities, folks who day in and day out do this work, including people like Karen Goldman, our former Secretary of the Senate, who's now a Deputy City Clerk for Aurora. People who, at their heart, want to ensure voter integrity, that every single person who is eligible to vote has the ability to vote. I think that's the important focus we should be having here today. I want to have a quick conversation about what this bill does, and more broadly about some of the policy implications that have been discussed as a broader issue. Number one, this bill, as I said, was drafted in close consultation with the special districts, the municipal league, voter integrity advocates, and people of all political affiliations outside of this building. We have people like Republican County Clerk in Jefferson County, Pam Anderson, who helped to consult to ensure that this was secure but fair and accessible, making sure that every single person has the ability to cast a vote. It was also brought to my attention that there was concerns about whether or not the clerks actually wanted to clarify that the Clerks Association took a vote on this. There were only 2 abstentions but no votes on House Bill 1164. There is one member who is a county clerk who is not a member of the Colorado County Clerks Association, and that's Mr. Wayne Williams, and he has chosen not to affiliate with the association for his own personal reasons. And that's not something I think that we should discuss, but that the folks who are in charge of administering our elections are sure that this bill will ensure accessibility and security. And I think that's important to note. The people who actually do the work day in and day out. Again, from a process perspective too, when we've talked about these special districts, there have been a whole host of concerns raised about how special districts should conduct their elections. And as we've gone through this debate, we've recognized there may be merits on how we actually look at reforming our special district elections, whether it's about the hiring of designated election officials or others. And again, the bill was drafted to harmonize our special districts with the law that we passed last year, to ensure there was no confusion over residency requirements, that someone wasn't confused about whether or not they could vote for, let's say, a statewide tax measure but couldn't vote for a local property issue. That there would be less confusion for voters, that this would actually ensure a more fair and accessible system for all voters. There have been underlying critiques of House Bill 1303 from last year, and again, that's a larger policy conversation that deserves scrutiny. I get it. We can continue to have that conversation, but what this bill did was to try and harmonize what currently exists in law and certainty for our special districts and our municipalities, the fire districts, the dirt districts, the others, who are preparing to run an election in May. So, when we talk about process, I want to be clear, we were asked to sit down with all the stakeholders, and we did that. We consulted with the Secretary of State's office. He said, he had no ability, no staff capacity, and he's already struggling with a budget issue, that he could not take on the direct supervision of special district associations. He's already looking at a $5.5 million deficit in his budget. Said he had no capacity, no ability. And that these decisions should be handled at the local level. So that's what we did. And again, when we started these conversations, we started in a bipartisan manner with bipartisan bill sponsors, and all of these concepts were heavily vetted by voter integrity advocates, members of the public, the Secretary of State's office, and with our municipalities and the special districts. So from a process perspective, I think it's very important to note that went through over and over and over again to ensure that this was the right bill, to harmonize a large change in election law. I recognize that. A federal bipartisan commission actually indicated that the changes we made last year made our system the most modern and secure in the country. And the two people heading that Presidential Commission on Election Administration were the election attorney for President Obama and the election attorney for Mitt Romney. Those were the folks who headed up that commission and indicated that we have one of the most secure but most fair forms of election administration here in the state. And the concepts in 1303 were discussed in their report, but again, that's underlying policy that doesn't deal with what we have before us today. House Bill 1164 was designed to provide that bridge to ensure certainty so folks could actually conduct elections in May. It's a quick timeline coming up. So, we've talked about one piece, harmonizing residency requirements. We've talked about the second piece, which is about creating a Colorado local government code. There's been a lot of debate about that, but what we've essentially done is take the election practices that happen in the municipal code, and again, before the introduction of this bill, our special districts largely utilized the municipal code for the running of their elections. And there's been a concern about some of the provisions of the municipal code. One of them we've had a debate on this morning, and I want to read something to clarify the concerns that folks had. But again, special districts conducted their elections under the municipal code before the introduction of this bill, and we're taking most of those provisions and placing them in the local government code. So I want to read something because there was a big concern earlier this morning. There was a question raised. I want to respond to the question that was raised. In 13-10-102, in the definition section, which is specifically the municipal election code, it said that watcher means a registered elector of the municipality. So again, special districts were using the municipal code. This was already a requirement that you had to be a registered elector of the municipality. That was how it was construed before the introduction of House Bill 1164. It is what currently is stated in code, and there is no change in code. It is a continuance, a bridge of what was previously in law to what is currently in law. But it helps to consolidate the practices that were used under the municipal code under the Colorado local government code, because special districts are different than municipalities. That's why there was the necessity to create the same type of clarity for those local governments. So if there was concerns about that point, thank you for raising the question. I wanted to be clear where it came from. It actually came straight from the municipal code, which is where our special districts have used those specific regulations time and time again. So I want to raise another piece and again respectfully say that this has been a vigorous debate. I've been up here for every single amendment, every single conversation point, and have stood up to try and respond point in, point out, because I respect this process. And in doing so, there have been a whole host of issues that have been raised about how special district elections have always been conducted. The purpose of the bill was not to change how special districts conducted their elections. It was meant to be a bridge to harmonize to what we passed last year. And there have been valid points. I extend my hand to the good senator from Larimer County to work on some of the issues that he's raised. But I want to note that this bill was one that was closely crafted with bipartisan support inside and outside of this building to address key issues that those districts are facing today. And I had one bill title reserved for that. And every single member in this chamber has the ability to run a bill about those issues and have had for decades. And those haven't been addressed in this chamber. We haven't adopted those policies. But I think what we did in this discussion, in this debate, is highlight some areas of common concern that should provide ground for us to actually move forward, identify additional solutions, and work together, 18 plus 17, to find some common solutions. I think that's important to note. Finally, I stood up here to have a conversation about policy, because I think it's important that our rural fire districts and our library districts and our recreation districts that are getting ready to plan how they conduct elections, those folks who day in, day out commit their lives to voter integrity, ensuring every single person has access to our democracy, that they have some ability to plan. That's what this was about. That was the policy piece. But there was an underlying question about politics, and I want to raise this again, and I'll be more precise with my words. The minority leader had indicated a concern about some of the words I said about Mr. Caldera. So I will just list out a series of facts that we know and not make any accusation. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a DA. I'm not the Attorney General. But when we talk about voter integrity, what we need to do is trust the folks who are day in, day out protecting voter integrity. And there was one situation that was discussed today and one that was discussed yesterday, where someone knowingly drafted a fraudulent lease with a conspiracy of a former elected official who worked in the DA's office, and then there was no prosecution filed. The minority leader was right. He was not convicted, and he was not even tried for that crime. But the facts indicate that he intended to defraud our election system, and he boasted of such on his radio show and on TV and in public. And I think we need to have a serious conversation. So I'm extending my hand to both sides of this aisle to say we need to have a serious conversation about voter integrity. But that's not this bill. If folks want to work with me on ensuring that someone can't conspire to commit fraud by offering their basement as a fake residence for an election, I would love to run that bill. If folks would like to work with me on enhancing the penalties for folks who commit voter fraud, I would love to work on that bill with you. And I'm extending my hand to both sides of these aisles to saying, if we want to stop voter fraud, what we need to do is when we see it, when we hear it bragged about on TV or on Facebook or on Twitter, we need to take action. Because if we don't prosecute voter fraud when we know it's happening, when folks are bragging about it on the airwaves, it just encourages other folks to do it. And they're not going to have an attorney in their pocket or a former elected official who's willing to commit conspiracy to defraud our election system. Again, those are different issues. We can have those conversations, but they've been had at this mic over and over. I'm more than happy to talk about making sure that perhaps we change the felony level or the fines, or we make an additional crime that you can't conspire to commit voter fraud. Those are great policy conversations, but that's not what HB 1164 did. What HB 1164 did was provide certainty about eligibility requirements so folks can cast a ballot where they live, so they're not disenfranchised by being told you have to go back to some place where you no longer live to cast a ballot. You no longer have a residence there, you have no longer the intention to remain there. Right? That's voter disenfranchisement, by saying you have no ability to vote in the district where those decisions will have the most direct impact on your life. Whether it's fixing the pothole or making the property improvement to your bridge, that's actual voter disenfranchisement. Right? This bill was meant to be a harmonizing piece of legislation. You know, I want to reiterate at the end of this that this has been a large undertaking, and I hope you take the time to touch base with your special districts like I did. I was in direct conversation with the Berkeley Water District in southwestern Adams, who needs this law to pass so they have certainty of how they conduct their election this upcoming May. I talked to my local school boards, the folks from Adams 50. They told me the same thing. I encourage you to go back to those folks and say, what should we do? I had one bill title, and all of us have 5 if we don't have late bill titles. And if there are other things that we should be doing, we should be taking the initiative, not decrying the fact that I stood here before you all, engaged in vigorous but respectful debate, engaged with my Republican colleagues to get a bipartisan sponsor on this bill, made all of the principals aware well in advance, made sure folks understood the concepts outlined here, and then be maligned here over and over because of that work. That's how policy should be made, by engaging stakeholders, talking to folks on the ground who actually do the work. Right? We've heard that there's opposition. I get there's opposition. There's opposition to every bill. Right? Sometimes we're not in complete consensus, but that's how we actually have to get to some productive end result. We have that debate. We argue, we discuss, we find common ground, and then we move forward. And sometimes we don't all agree, but that's okay. That's how things work in this building. We have to respect the process. We have to respect the debate, and we do that. And then there will be detractors. We know that there are some detractors. We know there are certain folks who are against this bill. I've already said one. Secretary of State is against this bill. He did not want the ability to oversee these elections. He's already had management issues when it comes to the budget of the Secretary of State's office. He's facing a $5.5 million budget deficit and had no desire, no capacity, and no staffing ability to have direct oversight. Okay. We know that there are a couple county clerks that are in opposition to this as well. There are 2 that have been named to this point. I've had great conversations with Mr. Williams from the Springs, and we have actually agreed on certain provisions of law. We can do that. Haven't had the same chance with Mr. Aerosmith, right? But we have to actually be honest when we have these policy conversations, that there are many considerations being made. I appreciate again the opportunity to discuss this bill with you all, and look forward to working side by side with any of my colleagues working to address these issues further. Thank you.